breaking news from the International Court of Justice. They've ordered on Israel to take steps to prevent genocide in Gaza, but they've stopped short of ordering Israel to ceasefire.
Yes, South Africa brought the case to the UN's top court, believing Israel's response to the 7th of October attacks is in breach of the UN's Genocide Convention. Israel now have 1 month to respond to the Hague-based court. Well, joining us now is GBNews security editor Mark White. We're hearing that they have stopped short of ordering Israel to ceasefire, to stop all military intervention in Gaza. How do you expect Israel to respond?
Well, I think Israel will say that they are doing their utmost to try to prevent civilian casualties in Gaza, and they certainly are not indulging, they would say, in genocide in any way, shape or form. There's no doubt, I think the South Africans will try to present this as a victory, and I think in truth it's a partial victory for them. But clearly it stops short of that main urgent call from them for a ruling by this court for Israel to impose an immediate ceasefire. That the court is not doing. Instead, it's urging Israel to take all steps possible to ensure that there is no genocide in Gaza, and also to ensure that more is done to help the civilian populations in terms of humanitarian aid reaching that population in Gaza. And it's given them a month, really, to report back to the court on what they are doing to try to follow the ruling that was set down by the court, but no ceasefire. However, what they do and what they did rule was that the case brought by South Africa alleging genocide in Gaza does have a plausible argument. In other words, they are willing to investigate it further in a more substantive hearing. And when I say a more substantive hearing, I really mean it, because these hearings will go on for years. A case that was brought against Myanmar for allegations of genocide against the Rohingya. That case has been going on for years and is continuing as well. So there's no doubt that the case itself, before we ever reach a conclusion on the merits of that case, this is why, as I say, South Africa wanted this interim ruling by the court to try to call for an immediate ceasefire to stop what is going on, the bloodshed in Gaza. But I think Israel will see it as a partial victory as well, because they've effectively been allowed to continue their operations with, of course, the caveats that they've got to do all in their power to ensure that there is no genocide committed, that any one who is inciting genocide in Israel has to be prevented from doing that. And that may well be a reference to some of the far-right members of the cabinet who have been seen as indulging in very inflammatory language over recent months.
Mark, it seems to me that the court has actually taken the line that the United Kingdom government, that the United States government has been taking throughout this conflict, that Israel has a right to defend itself, a right to go after Hamas, but must do so in line with international law. There'll be people who were cheering with much fanfare this court case, people like Jeremy Corbyn, who travelled over to The Hague on the first day of hearings, who've been calling for a ceasefire, who are going to be mightily disappointed that the international lawyers, that the International Court of Justice has sided, it seems, with the arguments of the British government, the American government and others, and not with those calling for a permanent ceasefire.
Well, there is certainly that aspect. And, you know, on that particular point, of course, South Africa will be disappointed that there isn't an unequivocal call for Israel to immediately cease fire and stop its military operation in Gaza, and instead should, you know, make sure that what is happening there in prosecuting the war, that there is no genocide genocide that is being committed. As you say, that seems to fall in line with what we've been hearing from the likes of the UK government and others in recent months, as they are obviously concerned about the impact that this war is having on the civilian population in Gaza, and wants Israel to do as much as possible to ensure that more aid, for instance, is allowed into that country to help that population out. From Israel's point of view, of course, even if this court had ruled that there should be an immediate ceasefire, Israel would not have done that. The rule, although it's legally binding in terms of those members of this court, and of course Israel and South Africa are both members joined up to the International Court of Justice, it is not enforceable. So if Israel decided that it didn't want to follow whatever was being...
Mark, I'm just going to interrupt you there. We've got a statement outside The Hague from the South African delegation. Let's listen in.
And Omar is going to speak as well. DG will take questions. You all ready? Yes. Good to go. Minister, over to you.
My name is Naledi Pandor, and I'm the South African Minister of International Relations and Cooperation. I wish to begin by thanking the judges of the International Court of Justice for dealing with this matter expeditiously, given the urgency of the need to protect innocent civilians in Palestine, and to ensure that the harm that South Africa has referred to in the case it brought before the ICJ, that harm is addressed and that people's lives are saved. The saving of life is not merely with respect to having a ceasefire, it's to ensuring that humanitarian aid is provided to those who need support, as well as ensuring that the State of Israel, which is currently the occupier and administrator in Palestine, provides the necessary basic services that the residents of Gaza and the West Bank require. This case was very much about international bodies ensuring that they exercise their responsibility to protect us all as global citizens. All member states of the United Nations have attached their signatures to a range of instruments. But when lives are threatened, these instruments are not brought to bear. And South Africa had the view that we could not stand idly by and continue to observe the killing of thousands of Palestinian citizens who had no role in the awful act of hostage-taking and killing that was done by Hamas. And therefore, we thought it important that we do report and apply to the International Court of Justice that the measures provided within the Convention for the Punishment and Prevention of Genocide are brought to bear, and that the State of Israel is called upon by the judges to act to protect civilians and to end the massive level of harm that we have seen since the Israeli action began. And we agree entirely with the judges that Hamas should release the hostages that they're currently holding. We also, in our various engagements with our partners internationally, believe the moment is now ripe for there to be negotiations for a two-state solution to end this conflict decisively.
Minister, are you disappointed there wasn't a ceasefire? Are you disappointed the court?
Naledi Pandor, the International Relations Minister of South Africa, speaking there at The Hague outside the International Court of Justice. Mark White, our Home and Security Editor, is still with us here in London. And Mark, what do you make of how the South Africans are responding to this partial victory, partial loss at The Hague today?
Well, as predicted, I think they're accentuating the positive, which is the fact that in the ruling from the International Court of Justice, it wasn't just about calling for an immediate ceasefire, but also acknowledging the plight of the Palestinian people in Gaza and requiring of Israel much more effort to try to ensure that more aid and assistance is allowed into Gaza to help these people. Now, of course, from Israel's point of view, there is also the disappointment, I'm sure, that the court has ruled that there is a plausible case to answer here, that South Africa can have this more substantive court case that will run into years. And in that court case, of course, Israel will stand accused of genocide, an anathema to, of course, people within Israel. There's a great deal of anger that this has even reached the International Court of Justice, a country, a state born out of genocide itself. And, of course, just tomorrow is Holocaust Remembrance Day, and to be accused of that on the international stage is something that has deeply angered many Israelis. They say the only people that are guilty in this instance of genocide are Hamas, in trying to wipe out, if they could, the population of Israel. That is their stated aim, their stated goal. And while that is the stated goal of Hamas, Israel say that is why they will continue to prosecute the war until they have degraded Hamas to such an extent that it is no longer a threat to the population of Israel.
Well, thank you very much indeed, Mark White, for bringing us that. Our Home and Security editor there. Some people will be disappointed that the ruling didn't go far enough in calling for a ceasefire. Others think the whole thing is ridiculous and that Israel would say that they have no intention of committing a genocide to begin with.
And isn't it interesting that it's Israel that gets taken to the International Criminal Court and not, for example, the Houthis, who have in their official slogan, "Death to Israel, a curse upon the Jews."
Sounds pretty genocidal.
It sounds fairly genocidal, doesn't it? But no, the focus on Israel, although it has to be said, this interim ruling today sounds very in line with UK policy. It seems if there's a winner today, it's not Jeremy Corbyn, who stood there on day one of this hearing saying, there's genocide going on, let's call for a ceasefire. It seems like he's been rebuffed, and instead it's people like the arguments made by Rishi Sunak that have been vindicated.
Yeah, it sounds like the type of ruling where different people, depending on their view, can take a win from it. Let us know what you think. gbviews@gbnews.com.